Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. I know we have some people who've joined us nice and promptly and early, and I'm sure they're being late on a Friday. We want this, we'd be happy for this to be a quick start and a timely finish. We are going to give it a couple of minutes just so anybody can join who's had to maybe be a little bit delayed. So please bear with us, and we'll be making a start very, very shortly. Thank you. Okay, we'll just give it a few seconds more, and then we'll kick off. 15:02, we'll make a start. Welcome everybody, thank you for joining, and welcome to our webinar on cloud governance. I'm very pleased that you're here this afternoon with us, and I'm going to take an early opportunity to wish you a very nice weekend when we're done, just in case when we get to the end we run out of time. So with that said, I shall make a start. So I guess the introduction piece is, we know governance is a moving target and it needs constant focus and new approaches, especially at the rate of change that cloud has. And we've kind of taken a look at some surveys, and cost and security remain top concerns for everybody. Governance is its own discipline is now coming into increasing focus, and we have some recent surveys that open that up for us. So what I will say at this point in time is this will be an interactive session. There are a few points along the way that we'll be asking for your input. If you go to slido.com and enter the hashtag of RCN Cloud, that'll take you onto the system, and then at the point where we open up those questions for you, you'll have some options on how to respond. We'll outline those as they come along. Also, you can use the QR code if you're using a mobile, so whichever your preference is. And also, I believe in the chat or Q&A, we will have the link posted if it's not already. So a few options for you there to go and access Slido. I just want to introduce who we're talking to today. So I'm Darren Adcock. I'm one of the product managers in RedCentric. I'm also joined by Sam Webster, who is the head of our architecture team, Warren Ward, who is also a product manager in the Cloud Services Group, and finally Neil Hunter, who's a principal architect, particularly on the AWS side. I want to just introduce the fact that Sam is more of an Azure man, so we are trying to cover all angles along the way there. Okay, so what is cloud governance and why does it matter, I guess, is the question that we're all asking. I hope you are as well. Cloud governance covers multiple disciplines, and obviously cost optimization and security are key ones. And obviously another key part of governance is applying guardrails to enforce policies that make sure governance is in good shape. So we have some research. Flexera do a State of the Cloud report every year. It's a useful bit of content if you not come across it before. It is freely available, and there's some good insights in there. So feel free to do so. In the 2023 report, which really looks back at predominantly at 2022, they polled 750 organisations. You can see there the majority were enterprises, although small to medium businesses were also represented. The exception of the skills and resource challenges, the top 6 challenges are all different variations of a governance theme. And in actual fact, governance as a kind of standalone concern, a standalone topic, as it were, is also now is now appearing in their top 6. And but having said that, security and cost do remain the number 1 and number 2. They seem to switch orders occasionally, but they are still 1 and 2. And we will have some focus on security and cost today, but that we will also cover other aspects of governance. And there it is. That's actually just one of the infographics from that report, and you can see there even the lower items on there, like compliance and managing software licenses. They're still a form of governance. They kind of still fall under a governance topic, or maybe a bit more specific, but nonetheless, they are really in the governance space. So again, governance is clearly important, certainly based on the outcome of this research. I'm just going to move on quickly to something a little light-hearted, but the message is actually quite key, right? And really, I guess the key point is that actually pretty much every part of the business needs to treat cloud governance seriously. And the key reason there is predominantly to avoid overspend, or the other one that always concerns people is that security incident that may cost thousands of pounds in lost revenue and untold damage reputationally. So getting everybody on board is key here. And yeah, it's a slightly funny slide, but nobody wants to be in that situation. So let's come on and take a look at a couple of the governance sound bites that are out there that other research is telling us. So on the cost and security side, industry analysts are predicting cloud spend to grow, as you can see. Right now, the expectation, if we look at that headline quote on the right, 18% overspend compared to in 2022 compared to 11% in 2021. So clearly, cloud spend is growing. That in itself that highlights that fact. It's also growing somewhat uncontrollably if those numbers are true. The other thing, right now, clouds, the estimated overspend is about 25%. So if that overall spend is growing by 30%, that's 25% of a much bigger number. So clearly, this is something that is going to need more and more and continual focus as we move forward and as cloud continues to grow. So that's cost. I guess on the security side, this is probably a bit obvious. It's still important. The concerns have changed. Obviously, the geopolitical landscape at the moment highlights the threat of state actors. I think everybody's become more aware of that. And being resilient against them is and probably has never been more important. But obviously, state actors are only a small part of the global threat. So security is always going to be key, and remaining vigilant against it is always going to be important, and maintaining that solid security posture. So coming up to a quick poll, because we'd like to understand what you think. So again, the QR code is there. So if you've not yet had an opportunity to join Slido to be able to provide your feedback, or if you have joined us a little late and didn't catch it earlier, please go ahead. It is also, I believe, in the chat. So there's a few ways to get to that. So question 1 is, what are your top 3 cloud concerns? So if you'd just like to add some words, add in your own descriptions in there, and we'll be able to see the results of that shortly. And then question 2, we'd also like you to zoom in on these particular 3. And again, we'd like you to rank them with a score of 1 being your highest priority and a score of 3 being your lowest priority. And those 3 are controlling cloud spend, security, and a lack of skills. Give it a moment whilst you guys get to respond. And there we have it. We have the results starting to come in. So interestingly, cost and security, again, although we got cost and cost control there, cost and security figuring highly as usual. Again, in line very much with that research. So that's it's good to know that the research is good. And I guess with 750 respondents, you would hope that that research would be fairly reflective of what you guys think. So that's great. Thank you for that one. If we can move on to the ranking that you guys have done, I'm thinking number of responses there. Everybody's had a reasonable chance to respond to that question, and let's see where we are on this one. And remarkably the same outcome, so that's interesting. I'll give it just a few extra seconds. I think there is a slight delay between these being entered and appearing on screen, so we probably just about had enough time now for everybody to respond. All right, there's still a little bit of change. I'll give it a few seconds extra. Okay. It looks very clear that the top two aren't going to change, although lack of skills is actually not that far apart, so clearly it is a concern for some of you. Okay, right, I'm going to get back to the presentation. And at this point in time, I'm going to hand over to Sam Webster, who is going to take you through our approach and some detail around things that maybe can help you.
Hi guys, thanks Darren. I just want to say before I start, I want to highlight really that while I'll be talking probably mostly around sort of technical aspects of the cloud governance space, it is only really part of the story, and that probably the easy bit to a certain degree, but people and processes are also extremely important when it comes to governance, and Darren will touch again on that a little bit later on in the presentation. So I think as Darren sort of mentioned at the start, I'm a Microsoft guy, so my bit here, I'm probably generally going to put an Azure or a Microsoft slant on things when I talk about the tech, but everything I'll cover can equally apply to Azure and AWS as well, and both Neil and I will be available at the end to answer any questions you'll have about either those technical areas or those specific tech areas. So yeah, so in the following few slides, I'm going to cover sort of 6 key outline areas, and trying to where we can try and improve our technical foundations and help you gain some insight around cloud governance. And it's also worth pointing out that much of the information I'm presenting here is really expanded quite a lot in the various providers' cloud adoption frameworks, of which there's lots and lots of information in those documents that are just available online to review. So moving on to the first sort of foundational area of organizational structure. Let's think of the structure of the resources really. So the public cloud providers offer multiple level hierarchies for things like management groups and subscriptions in Azure, or OUs and accounts in AWS, for example. And using these allows us to sort of use inheritance or restrict where things like policies and permissions are applied, and it helps with aligning costs to different parts of the business. It's also a really important step, as lots of the things we'll speak about later sort of built on top of this, and so as we progress through, I'll call out these areas and sort of outline where we've already sort of mentioned it and talked about it. So there's some quick wins we can have in the org structure part. First of all, it's best to sort of define and deploy an initial management structure. And I say initial because it will change. Your organization structure will change over time as you gain more sort of capability, maturity, and working with the tech. All of the things we discuss here are iterative, in fact, and obviously the cloud in itself is a bit of a moving target with constant changes and constant evolution. So all these things will iterate, but really the management structure is a very, like I say, a foundational piece. So it's very important that you kind of revisit that throughout that process. So sort of thinking about the two items that we've talked about and sort of everyone's sort of mentioned around security and cost. So from a security point of view, we can have a quick win in if we think about which teams need to do what, or which virtual teams need to do what, and what access do they need to the resources. And another good sort of rule of thumb is try and keep the use of global admin to a minimum. So you just use the sort of roles and permissions that are required there. But the hierarchy itself, think about how that might work best, and align those to your teams as best you can. And then from a cost point of view, a quick win, we should consider if we need to track costs for specific departments or services. And by doing that, it'll help us define what the management structure might need to accommodate. So, if there's different areas of the business that have specific remit, then trying to build your structure and your hierarchy to meet that then will help significantly later.
Sam, sorry to jump in there. I'm just hearing that the attendees are seeing a different screen to us. Darren, have you got the right screen shared? Have you got that in presenter mode? Sorry, Sam.
All right.
That's the one.
We're on the next slide, I think. Perfect, thank you. So yeah, sorry, I was going to talk about another quick win really. So naming and tagging strategies can really help with security and cost management. So for example, getting your naming right is, if you have a security incident, for example, it's critical to quickly identify what's affected and what function those systems are supporting. So your naming standards is really important there. Whereas if you use tags, you can group costs across the entire estate, across the entire organization, and that allows you to track spend in very, very flexible ways. So just some really easy things to think about when you're thinking about the structure and some basics around that structure. Longer term, as I've sort of mentioned, the best practice guidance, the cloud adoption frameworks, and there's other sources of guidance out there as well, help you define your business operating model, which can then be used to better align your management structure to. And yeah, as I say, each of the cloud adoption framework providers goes into a lot of detail around how to think about your operating model and how to better align your operating model to work with cloud technologies. So moving on to visibility next. So visibility sort of comes before organizational structure in some ways, because how can we really define what our management structure looks like if we're not really aware of all the things we need to manage? And and it's a little bit of a common problem, especially where public cloud's involved, where kind of it's so easy for anyone to be able to purchase cloud services and not necessarily go through the correct processes. So that you get processes in place. It makes it easy for your business and your business users and your business entities to follow, and it doesn't. And your process needs to not put any artificial barriers in place to do that, because again, if there's barriers there and it's harder for people to work with, then more things are more likely to fall outside of that process. So that's just sort of an opening thing to think about from a visibility point of view. So what can we do quickly in terms of visibility to sort of focus around our two areas we're thinking about today, so the cost and security piece? Well, I mean, to sum it up, just set up some alerts. Budget alerts is an easy way to surface if you have a rise in a monthly cost, or you can also look at things like cost anomaly alerts, where it's useful. It can detect if your costs sort of deviate up or down from the normal. So you might not have a flat baseline sort of figure for a budget, but an anomaly alert can help with understanding if something's changed that doesn't seem right. Again, a really simple thing to implement is a security alert. So you get a notification when something unusual is detected. And again, you'd be surprised often we've seen that no notification email address has been put in the box that just sends those security alerts out just from the default built-in native capabilities of the cloud providers portals. So yeah, very important and very easy way to surface and find out about what's going on. Another thing that both Azure and AWS have is what we're calling advisor services, and so you'll have come across these if you've looked at any of the massive amounts of services in these environments. So Trusted Advisor, I think it is in AWS, and just Advisor in different guises in Azure. And again, these surface recommendations to help you align to best practice, make things more secure, and help with costs. And again, for these services, you can set up alerts on those. So if a new recommendation is sort of surfaced, then you'll get a notification about that, and you can go and have a look and have a think about how to improve things and align to those better. So some really easy stuff to do there. Such easy wins is just set some alerts or put some email addresses in. If you're using multiple clouds, then public clouds, then for effective governance, it's probably really important to try and get a single view across all of them. There are multiple tools available to do this already, and for example, you can add AWS environments into Microsoft Defender for Cloud, and therefore you'll get both Azure and AWS environment information in a single governance pane of glass, which is also really useful to be able to help starting to see what's going on across the board. If we move on to sort of our policy baseline, policy is a really powerful tool for governance. It's probably one of the more powerful elements of it, really, as it allows us to sort of apply guardrails centrally. Basically, the policy says what we want to control, what's the condition to meet the policy, and what do we do if the condition isn't met. So, what is the action? The cloud providers again give you loads of inbuilt policies that can be easily deployed, including policies to help alignment with regulatory standards. So where you already have an existing cloud environment and you want to start using policy, the simplest way to start is to set the action on the policy to be notification, and in fact the default configuration is kind of like that. And then look at what those notifications are, look at what that status is for alignment to that policy. If you don't do that, then the other option is remediation, but it's a lot harder to control the remediation of non-compliance if you just sort of turn it on from day one. So it's a sort of slow and steady approach to try and do that, but should look at trying to auto-remediate stuff later. Again, some quick wins in this area. So deploy a policy that enforces resources to have the tags that you've defined. So we talked about tags earlier. So let's put a policy in place to say that anytime a resource is created, it must have a tag that we've defined for the business, whether it's like a cost center or something like that. And then that aligns to what you've done with your organizational structure, but also again helps with that visibility of where the costs are coming from and who needs to look at that. So again, really easy to do that with policy. Another policy that you might want to deploy is one that restricts who can deploy certain kinds of resources. So for example, you might only allow your developers to deploy the cheaper VM SKUs or you know, the limited capability VMs, so that they don't spin something up, a big SQL database, for example, which then generates a load of cost when they don't really need it. So that's a policy can be put in place to do that. Or limit who can create express route circuits, again on Azure Tech. Again, express route, quite a big cost item, and therefore your bill would jump up because someone had done it by mistake or you weren't aware of it. So that's a good way to control who can do what using policy. And then longer term, review what the default policies, as I mentioned, and the compliance status, and then you can go through all those policies that are there and decide whether you need to remediate them because they are actual issues for your environment, or you can create exemptions from those policies, those default policies, to say that actually this doesn't apply in our case, we don't need this. And that way you'll start getting a better score and green ticks within your policy dashboards, and things will be a lot more compliant and aligned. If we move on to the security baseline, if you're already in the cloud, then you've probably got a security baseline as such already established, and much of that tends to focus around identity and access management. Many of the quick wins in this area are regularly surfaced by the relevant cloud identity providers portals. So other things to note here is that some of the more powerful features of these kind of things sometimes incur additional licenses. So in the Azure case, then you get additional features if you have an Azure P2 or P1 license, which you wouldn't get in the Azure AD free, but those may also be bundled into other license types like your Microsoft 365 E3s and E5s. So again, you should make sure you're trying to utilize those functionality if you are paying for those license types already. So some of the quick wins we can do here. So even with Azure AD free, make sure you turn on the built-in security features. So in Azure AD free, it's called security defaults. And if you turn that on, it forces all users to have to use MFA, multi-factor authentication, when logging in. And it also disables things like IMAP and SMTP, which are considered legacy authentication protocols. It just makes things a little bit tighter for free, dead easy, just a tick box, away you go. Other providers on AWS, like AWS Identity Center or Okta, also provide similar capabilities. So yeah, all available in there. Conditional access gives us even more control. So again, I think it's sort of more an Azure term, but the same features are available in AWS. And this capability allows us to put rules around things like geolocation. So if you turn on conditional access that says only users can log in from the UK because you're a UK-based company, then that helps reduce your attack surface from, you know, some of these foreign hacking people that we see a lot of news about at the moment from Russia or South Korea or North Korea or wherever it may be. So yeah, again, that's a really useful feature. I will say in Azure, then conditional access is an Azure AD premium license requirement for that. So again, if you've already got those licenses, then get it used. If you haven't, then there's definitely a business case to look at that and consider whether it's worthwhile. Certainly for your administrators, you should be looking longer term, should be looking at implementing least privilege on those and implementing some of these other features. The other thing to consider for your admin accounts is using just-in-time privilege. So rather than having things like global admin available all the time to a user account, then if you use just-in-time privilege, you only need to turn that global admin role on when you need it. And then that has a time frame, and when you've finished, it removes that again. And again, it's another way of reducing that attack surface very easily. Again, for admin accounts, get some additional licenses to do those because it's worth it for those accounts. So again, moving on to the cost baseline. So within cost governance, we've kind of got three areas to think about. So visibility, again, we've talked about that. Accountability is another one, and then optimization. So yeah, we've talked a bit about visibility already. And for an organization to be cost conscious, it needs visibility into those costs, right? So we've kind of covered that. So we've got to be able to see what it is we need to see for costs. Accountability is as important as visibility there, and make sure we need to start with clear budgets, and then again through an iterative process we align those budgets and try and adjust them and get them more accurate through the relevant teams being involved in that process. And then when the budget if a budget deviation occurs, then the teams that are responsible and accountable to that can work together to determine the best course of action to remediate it. So and that's the process of optimization, right? So optimization drives the cost reduction, but again via an iterative approach. But we need to find the best balance there between cost and performance, because usually if we reduce cost, we also reduce performance. So that's the balance we tread, but getting the right teams involved in that is absolutely key. So again, some quick wins in this area. Get the right cost data to the right people. I mean, sort of we talked about this, we talked about it in the org structure, being able to set that out and it being right. We've talked about it with tagging and budget alerts, so we've discussed all that already. But yeah, once those people have got the information, they should ensure they've discussed and set everything that's relevant to them, that the budgets are right, and then this is forming a starting point for them to then think about how can I reduce this cost, what can we do to change and optimize it. And there's many ways that optimization can occur. Another really easy way to save some costs is just to look and see what you've got and clean up stuff you don't need anymore. So clean up old resources. A really good example, if a VM's shut down, then that's good, you're saving some money there if it's shut down. However, it's still incurring costs because the storage has a cost associated with it. So if you don't need it anymore, get rid of it completely, have a process to do that. And remove those things. Other things like public IPs, again, if they're not being used, they're still costing you money even if they're not being used. So get rid of those. And then removing licenses from people who've already left the business, you know, those licenses still costing you money, remove them and allocate them to someone else. That way you're saving some money. All these things can contribute to the costs that are higher than they need to be, right? So really important, simple stuff. So longer term around this area, then putting processes in place to constantly review and optimize your resources is pretty key. So right sizing is one way to achieve it, and that can be challenging. It's quite a big, potentially a big topic. I mean, you may just want to change VM sizes, for example, but that comes at a cost, as we say, performance. So right sizing can be a challenging exercise. And sometimes we can't change the size of a thing very easily for whatever reason. So another way then to save money, if that is the case, then look at things like reserved instances, which is really just a way of committing to longer rental terms on your workloads, and that way you'll get a billing discount. So if you can't change the size of it, just commit to longer term, and you'll save some money there. Real easy stuff. And finally, in the 6 key areas, we'll move on to automation. So one of the big advantages of cloud is the lower bar to entry of automating stuff. Sometimes there can be a consideration whether it's worth automating a thing. You know, how much time will it actually save me if I spend all this time automating it? But really, when it comes to governance, I think automation is key, because without it, you won't necessarily go and manually perform stuff. Stuff needs to be surfaced automatically, and you know, it needs to be visible, and so automation is there to do that. So it's absolutely essential for governance. Some really easy automation opportunities, again, looking back at what we've talked about. Look at the service you're running and work out what's the ability to be stopped and started or dynamically resized, you know, on demand, automatically, sorry. So again, a classic example is a virtual machine, and is the service providing a 24-hour service? Does it need to be there 24 hours? Can it be scaled back at a certain point? Can it be shut down at a certain point? Then yes, automation, perfect, can do that for us on a regular basis. Same with other resources, you know, we can dynamically scale databases and other things, we can do that. So think about all your resources. Can we remove VMs from this cluster of services overnight because we only need it to be less available? We don't need it to be less available. We don't need it to be as performant. So that's really easy to achieve with automation. And then lots of the things we've discussed already, and all the previous slides I've just been through can be implemented using automation. We can even combine them. So apply tags to resources that are being unused for a certain number of days to flag for deletion, send a report on a schedule for deletions. You can have an optional approval on that, and then once the deadline's hit and it's been approved, resources are gone. Simple automation, done quite easily and quickly, and that deals with a number of items we've just talked about. Yeah, tagging automatically, again, we said about requiring tags in policy, but by doing it with automation, you make sure they're there as well. So, and make sure they're all the data's in the right place. Again, longer term for automation, it's worth revisiting those policies we've discussed, and let's get them sort of with automatic remediation. By doing that, then you stop policy drift, you prevent policy drift from new resources being deployed from day one. Immediately it's controlled. So there's a really good step to try and get that into place, and a good working practice. So that's kind of the end of my section. If you've got any questions, obviously, then feel free to ask them. You can ask them in Q&A now, and we'll try and answer them later. As I said, both Neil and I are on the call, so we can cover your questions around AWS or Azure. And yeah, thanks, and back to Darren.
Thank you, Sam. I'd just like to step through a couple of real-world examples of kind of things that governance could have helped with, and maybe could have had a significant and meaningful cost impact on. And some of these are well known. Sam's already touched on, you know, development activities where there was no usage at the weekend, but machines have been left up, you know, absolute unnecessary waste. And you know, it happens with the best will in the world. You know, the guys are busy. They maybe even leave a compile going, but then forget that, you know, that's going to run for 48 hours over the weekend, and maybe it needs 3. Penetration test that ran up a £50,000 bill, or sorry, $50,000 US bill. I'll come back to that one because I think it's worth a little bit more expansion. S3 buckets, I'm sure you've all seen news about S3 buckets that have been exposed with, you know, data that they didn't want done. I mean, Amazon have changed default, so it's not, you now have to deliberately decide to expose it, but it's still worth remembering that, if people are putting the wrong data in a public bucket, then you still may have a privacy concern. So think about what controls need to be in place to stop that. And another one that's kind of fairly common, code repositories out on GitHub or similar code repositories, and hard-coded credentials in there. You've maybe just given away the crown jewels to your public cloud estate. So, all things of real concern. I'm going to circle back to the penetration test one. It's a very interesting use case, and it kind of it expands on the point that it's actually a concern for everybody to think about governance, and governance is then obviously what is the impact of a decision that I do or don't make, and have I actually considered it from all the aspects that Sam has just gone through. In this case particularly, I guess it's the penetration test was absolutely needed. The business had a desire and a need and a compliancy reason to do that test. What wasn't considered was if that test ran for too long, or even ran at too high volume for a relatively short term, that's going to generate a very, very large bill. And that kind of illustrates where maybe your security or compliance team, whoever it was, is responsible for organising penetration tests, kind of almost needs to set that expectation with whoever's doing the penetration tests, and typically it's going to be an external provider rather than internal, to be mindful of cost, to be mindful of what they're doing, and actually maybe only run these things for short bursts. In this particular example, that $50,000 bill was over a 6-hour period. So, that kind of shows that it's a huge amount of money to be generated from a very, very valid activity, but a valid activity that really didn't need to run for that long. But again, it's probably there's a playbook that the penetration tests are playing to, and a sustained, simulating a sustained attack is kind of what they do. So yeah, again, it's back to consider the wider part, consider all of the parts of governance, whatever your role is in the organisation. So I'm just going to switch back to the three things that Sam mentioned earlier: people, process, and technology. A phrase we've all used and heard lots and lots of times before. And I'm not going to spend too much time on technology. There's a multitude of options of technology solutions to some of these problems, or to governance generally. So I won't deal in with those, because people and process is the part where we see people generally maybe struggling a bit more, because it's not out of the box as some of the things, like some of the solutions that Sam has already mentioned. So from a people side, we know that IT departments have kind of adapted gradually to cloud, but cloud has been moving very, very quickly. So it's been more and more widely adopted, and possibly the traditional approach to management of an estate has not kept up. So, and unless your business was founded on the public cloud, then your technology leadership is probably still looking for, or still coming from this is the way we used to do it in data center methodology. And they're probably now starting to look at, well, how do we get back control? Because the world has changed. What we're doing is different. So again, setting up the people and getting the right people with the right attitude and the right skills in place is critically important to make this work. And it has to be flexible, and it has to be fluid, because things are changing all the time. Process is an area where lots of organizations tell us they need assistance. It's the exponential growth of public cloud is driving some of that. It's very, very difficult to keep up. It can be hard to set up a process, and a process particularly that enforces your policies. It's can be quite a complex undertaking. We're the Helm platform that falls under this technology category, but we'll come back on another day to talk about this. Hopefully you're interested in that. But what we do underline that is we help our customers to form the processes and workflows, and then they align with the cloud model rather than the more traditional data center model, and actually bring governance to where it needs to be in that cloud model. So it's very, very important to make sure that your baseline is right and your operational fitness and agility are maintained as you go. So some emerging trends, there are a few of them. Automation, really this is taking a more active approach. So using more automation to control the costs, extending, maybe, for example, extending the benefits that auto scaling has, where, auto scaling will give you a small estate running until it needs to be bigger, and then it will shrink it down again. Well, that's great. That's kind of built in, but is there more you can do? We're seeing more of an emergence to people doing more automated, shut down, restart, resizing, where their applications can actually accommodate that, right, and their outage, and their availability requirements. So that's one area we're seeing. DevOps, and particularly infrastructure as code, is really continuing to drive improved governance. Obviously, the main benefit of that is it's a consistent deployment every time. So as long as your baseline deployment is clean, your future deployments will remain clean. So again, it's a very, very powerful tool in the toolbox. Governance as code is now moving further. So this is kind of similar to the way that secure scanning has emerged in a DevOps workflow. So you'll take your code and you'll scan it to make sure credentials aren't there in plain text, and secrets, or that secret data is being accessed by a call out rather than it just being in the code. So this is taking the same approach to say, let's make sure my estate has got the right governance policies in place. They've been implemented as my policies demand, and doing it automatically. And then finally, the use of machine learning and AI. Sam mentioned this already about anomaly detection. If something is suddenly running that much hotter or faster, why is that? Have I got what's causing that? Has something been set up differently to normal, and if so, why? And what is the risk of that? So using anomaly detection means that you are obviously able to keep up with that fast rate of change, because it will show up as an anomaly, which is good. Then you've got to work out what to do with it. So that sort of covers some of the emerging trends. Just like to outline a few thoughts on kind of enablers and detractors. Well, what helps you do governance and maybe what doesn't. We're finding it's critical that there's executive support to actually, put solid governance in place around your cloud deployments. One of the reasons that we frequently hear that executive support is important is because generally people are busy. So there's a lack of resources, and that may be people, that may be tools, to actually really get to grips with governance. So having executive support for governance, at least if a feedback loop says, hey, we'd love to do more, but we're lacking resources, hopefully that executive support will make those resources available such that you can get back on top of it as you need to be. Staff buy-in is absolutely critical across the organisation. This isn't a problem just for the compliance team. It's not a problem just for the security team. It's not a problem for finance or operations. It's potentially a problem for everybody. Everybody who has a part to play needs to understand that governance needs to be considered when they're doing anything around cloud changes, problem fixes, whatever it is, needs to be, they need to think about governance as part of that process. But obviously the main difference there is cultural resistance. People have got used to working in a certain role. Operations guys want to worry about operations, making sure that the systems are up running as they need to be, such that the services are, the end users are actually getting the service they need. But that can still lead to some governance drift, or governance exceptions that maybe aren't acceptable in the long term, or at least need to be looked at again, maybe when a problem's been solved, for instance. Actually, another key one on that, setting expectations so everybody knows what they're expecting to do, and actually, very importantly, track and communicate wins. So when a governance exercise has provided some real results, cost is probably always going to be a popular one. Let people know. Nothing breeds success like success. People understanding and seeing the benefit of governance and how it's helping the business will tend to kind of help with that cultural resistance, where people go, penny drops. There is value in this additional piece of work, because it's good for the business. And again, meeting expectations. And again, if they don't know what expectations they need to meet, then their focus drifts. It detracts from the focus. It's like, I don't know what it is that I'm expected to achieve. So again, back to that enabler, set expectations and tracking wins. Right, so we've got another poll that we'd like to step you through. The Slido thing is up there again, just in case you've maybe had a timeout on your mobile phone or any other issue, or had a problem and couldn't join earlier. Please fill that in again. And on the basis that I'm hoping that hasn't happened, I'll push on to the questions. So we have two more. Again, the first one is very much a free text answer. What is your most urgent thing to address in the governance space? So, if one of the 6 things we've outlined to you is one of them, then by all means list that. If there are others that you want to add, please feel free. So the last question we have, and I'm just going to give it a bit of time for the answer to come in on the first one. So security and cost again. Okay, so that's still changing, but quite heavily slanted towards security here at 50%. Oh no, changed, cost at 50% and security. But I'm not going to keep up with it for a little while. I'm going to let it settle. So I guess the conclusion, as this is continuing to change, is very much that cost and security, whatever the order they're in, are the top 2. So again, that does align with the research that we referenced earlier. So thank you very much for that. That's very useful to understand that, kind of aligned with the other research. And question 2, probably a nice, quick and easy one. Are you experiencing any of these challenges today, or are they concerns today? So please pile in on that one, and I'll give it a little bit of time again to see where we end up. I think the trend is showing that most of you are either aware that you have issues or are concerned that you may have issues that are underlying and need to be uncovered, and that governance is going to help. So that's very useful. I'll give it just a few seconds more because there is a bit of a delay between things appearing and us seeing the results, but don't think that result is going to change at 90% to 10%. So thank you all for that feedback. That's very, very much appreciated. Just going to switch back now to the presentation. There we are. Okay. So I just want to say, we are RedCentric. We are here to help. If you're constrained by resources, you're certainly not alone. Resources being people, experience, software, budget. Please come and let us know, and let's see if we can help you if you need it. We do bring experienced resource to bear to address governance and obviously other needs. So, as any before, we want you to be able to concentrate on your core business. So, if we can take some of the governance load off you and that's valuable to you, then, we're here to help. We've been providing assistance for many years, to customers for many years, as you know. So, we'd love to continue helping you along to maintain those wins that you've had. We are going to use the rest a bit of time now to answer any questions you'd like to ask. You can post a question in the Q&A. You can post it either publicly or anonymously. And what we'll do is we'll either let the panel answer those directly in text or speech, depending on how they best like to do it. And I'm probably going to switch back to Sam to answer the first question we got in, which is, can you provide any further detail?
That's all right. I'll get that. Provide any. So it says, can you provide any further detail on good practice for organisational structure? So organisational structure, if we think back, was about how you arrange those hierarchical pieces that you have. So in the AWS world, you have organisations, and then you have accounts, and beyond accounts you have resource groups and VPCs and regions and bits and pieces like that. But looking at organisational, well, looking at accounts, they're sort of natural fire breaks for arranging your workloads. So things like limits tend to be region or account based, and so yeah, so we don't generally tend to have accounts per environment, keeping production well clear of any pre-production environments that you have. People sometimes, we find, tend to have accounts that represent sort of global functions within their business. So if there's a centralized security team, for example, that's charged with looking after cloud security, they generally tend to have tools, and they, you know, you might find that there'll be an account set aside for that. And then turning to sort of AWS best practice, you also have sort of utility accounts. So as we sort of mentioned, you apply policy by group. So if you create a group, for example, for suspended accounts, say, then you can apply a policy that denies all access, and then when you're decommissioning accounts or need to decommission accounts, you can pop it in that group and know that that then no one will be able to do anything in there. So roughly that.
Okay, we have another question that's come in. What are Red-Centric's cloud customers asking you most about in the governance space?
I haven't spoken enough, have I? So I'll take that one as well. We tend to hear from customers who are, you know, have adapted to cloud rather than born in the cloud, and so, you know, these are migration stories, and a common one that we hear is that once there has been buy-in to move workloads to cloud, they sort of very quickly have to move. You know, there seems to be a need to show results almost straight away, and that prevents them from putting in some of these governance guardrails that we've been talking about today. And so, you know, right, okay, we're okay to move public cloud, and straight away workloads are going in there. So then as that grows, there tends to be some sort of compelling event, at which point, you know, it could be like a sizable bill or a security scare or something like that. It's at that point that we generally tend to get called in, and then we've, you know, got to try and reverse engineer some of these principles over the top, which is, you know, which is difficult for all parties. So it's an awful lot easier to build it in, because that's what your user expectations will be from the off, apart from anything else.
Question we have: does Red-Centric offer an audit/baseline review service for customers? The answer is yes. We have offerings that can be as small or as large as you want them to be. We do find that quite often customers are quite like to pick maybe a particular application or workload to review first, just to kind of understand, you know, the actual where they are, what their posture is with respect to that application. And but equally, customers, you know, may have wider concerns than we may want us to look at a lot more of their estate. So yeah, absolutely, we do offer services, and as I say, we have fairly low entry points to that. So we certainly, you know, want people to be able to take advantage of the service without necessarily making a huge commitment. So yeah, that's that one. We have another question that's come in. As a follow-up, can you distribute information on the service you can provide small organisations? particularly in relation to baseline policy setup for ultimately managing server resources and cost accountability. Yes, we will be distributing the content that we've been through today next week. So please look out for that one. It will be winging its way to your inbox. And obviously, if you want to follow up on that, then please do.
I think, sorry, just to also add that we do have some low entry processes where we can come in and help you look at exactly those things you're talking about around the policy setup and the automating of the server resources. And again, just a low point of entry where we focus purely on cost and security to try and help. That was that we've got a 2-day engagement that we're about to release in the next few months, which will be exactly that. So if you're interested in that, then you get in touch. That'd be great. Sorry, Darren.
No, that's fine, Sam. All useful information. Thank you. We got about 5 minutes left, so I think we'll leave it there on questions. I think it's Friday afternoon. Everybody's probably ready for this to be over out the door and hopefully enjoy the sunshine. I know it's sunshine. I know we have it here, and I hope you are all experiencing the same wherever you are. We'll move on just to close out here. I would say Slido is still open. We would like your feedback on the relevance of this webinar to you. Please mark it 1 to 5, 1 being actually not really relevant at all, and 5 being, yeah, really, really relevant. Best Friday afternoon I've ever spent in my life, ever. A little bit embellished there, but you get where I'm coming from. Please, please give us that feedback. We're always keen to hear whether we're doing the right thing and how we can help. So with that, I'm going to say thank you. I'm also saying thank you for the feedback that I've just asked for. I'm hoping that it was useful. We're always looking ways we can improve the way we communicate with you. So like I said, the time you take to join events like this is very much appreciated. And all the feedback you can give us is also appreciated. We want to make these events as relevant as possible to you. And that actually does bring me to one other piece of feedback that we're going to explicitly ask for. We'd like to invite you to let us know if there are any future topics you'd like to see us cover in future webinars that we can put together for you. There is a Slido option, which I think you should see now. We'll capture all the responses to that, and then we'll get back to you and put something else together and come back and hopefully help you some more. So yeah, please take the opportunity. If there's something that we've not addressed today, then that you think is really important, please tell us, and we'll come back to you and do our absolute best to help you along the journey. So last thing on there, if you do have any questions about our capabilities, if they want to know more, if there's specific elements of the process that you'd like to delve a bit deeper into, obviously we have limited time today, then please just reach out to your account manager or drop an email to the sayhello@redcentricplc.com email address, and that will be forwarded on to this team so we can actually reach out and respond to your questions. Without further ado, I'd like to say thank you very much for your time. It's Friday afternoon. I hope you all have a fantastic weekend, and wish you luck in next week's workload. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.